Abstentions. Question is carried and Thursday's business is agreed to. Now, on promised legislation, 1 minute per question, please. Deputy Mary Lou MacDonald.
Thank you, Count Corla. Taoiseach, children with special educational needs were among those who suffered most during the first lockdown, and despite the best efforts of everyone, staff, parents and the children and young people themselves, there was regression. The disruption to routine and the lack of social contact is very traumatic for them, and people of children with special educational needs were distraught, disappointed with the government's failure to plan for the school closure, because that led to there being no plan for their children's education. Everybody wants to see children back at school, especially those children and young people with additional needs. So that meant that your government needs to plan and to consult with workers, with all stakeholders. And unfortunately, that wasn't done, and it's led to very big disappointment. You know, Taoiseach, that remote learning doesn't work for many children with additional needs. They need in-school support.
Thank you, Deputy.
So, Taoiseach, will you direct the Minister to negotiate with all stakeholders and ensure that service is delivered to these children and young people at the earliest possible date?
Taoiseach.
Actually, it was in response to a lot of contributions from this House during the first lockdown and discussing the impact of the first lockdown on children with special needs that the government actually responded with a proposal to provide and to allow special needs children to come back to their special schools or their special classes in mainstream schools. And indeed, we facilitated the consultation between the head of public health and the Assistant Director of National Health, Kevin Kerr.
We should not necessarily be doing a state apology. We should have agreed a date with the survivors and their organisations. But also I have added concern now in relation to how we will deal with information and tracing legislation to help the survivors and their families. Minister O'Gorman this morning said that it would be the end of the year before we would be looking at this. But this is deeply concerning. This is absolute priority legislation for all of these families. There's actually a debate whether we need legislation at all, but I'll leave that aside. If there is legislation needed, surely given the fact that we can bring in emergency legislation for COVID, we brought in emergency legislation in the past to bail out the banks, given what has transpired for these people, surely the women and their families and children, everyone deserves this legislation to be brought forward in a rapid time in the coming weeks.
I don't disagree with the Deputy in relation to the need for this legislation. I think it's essential. There was considerable debate in the last Dáil, if you recall, around a legislative template around access to information and to tracing, and it proved not possible to get consensus in the House at the time to get that legislation passed. This government has looked at this afresh, and Minister O'Gorman, as he said this morning, is taking a different approach to this, and government is of that view that we need to be far more. We need to stretch this to ensure access to information for all involved in particular. And now, I think on the time frame, and again, we want to work with members of the House here and other parties in the House. We will do everything we can at government level with the Attorney General's advice and others, and the Minister and his department, that he's taken on specialist advice in relation to GDPR, for example. And I take your point in terms of the application of GDPR in terms of access to personal information and data. We'll do everything we possibly can to accelerate that.
is up. Deputy Holly Kearns.
The front page of today's Irish Examiner lists the 923 children who died in Besborough Mother and Baby Home in Cork. The burial place of only 64 children has been established. The Commission has found that some of the unaccounted for 859 children are probably buried on the grounds. Unbelievably, there are planning applications for developments on this site. I've raised this with you before, Taoiseach, and needless to say, it cannot be allowed to go ahead. Minister O'Gorman announced legislation for the dignified exhumation of the children in the mass grave at Tuam. Will you be introducing similar legislation for Besborough, and can you assure people that these developments cannot go ahead?
Thank you, Deputy Kearns. Taoiseach.
First of all, I would empathise with what the Deputy has said. I had spoken to one of the representative organisations some time ago in relation to the Besborough situation, and I think their main objective was that the burial site would be preserved. There is a view that people can identify. I agree with you that there needs to be, first of all, an examination and a proper, robust identification of the burial of all children. And I would have deep concerns about construction going ahead in the absence of that having been established and protected, and measures taken to protect such a burial site. So it's perhaps premature at this stage to talk about legislation on exhumation, but the bill that the Minister is bringing through in respect of Tuam can be applied to. No, I'm saying the legislation that he's introducing in respect of Tuam can be applied to other sites as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Mick Barry.
I would like to convey condolences to the family of Georgian Kensho, shot dead on December the 30th. The European Court of Human Rights decrees that the death of any person at the hands of police requires independent official investigation. In this case, I think that there needs to be an independent public inquiry which fully involves both the family and the community. Now, regardless of the very serious issues that occurred leading to Georgian Kensho being pursued, it is a matter of the utmost gravity when a young person is shot on their doorstep, not once, but 6 times, and so very quickly after being pursued. So can the Taoiseach outline what training Gardaí have for dealing with people with mental health issues? And can he outline how Gardaí relate to young people in minority communities, be they African, Muslim, travellers, or so on? In conclusion, racists and the far right are trying to exploit this tragedy. They are trying to stir up division in the diverse community of Blanchardstown, spreading vile lies on social media and so on.
Deputy.
They cannot and they will not be allowed to divide ordinary people on this issue.
Thank you very much, Taoiseach.
First of all, I want to sympathise with the family of Georgian Kensho on his very, very sad passing. And it is a grave situation that does merit investigation. And GSOC will carry out an independent examination of this. And I think it's important that we don't prejudice the outcome of a fair, independent investigation. The Gardaí work extremely hard to develop community relations and have been very effective in many, many communities. The Gardaí work in very difficult contexts as well. And that has to be acknowledged. The reason for GSOC's establishment was to create that independent arm of investigation into matters and into very grave incidents of this kind. In terms of community relations generally, I think the Gardaí have a very progressive policy in relation to that.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
And the Commissioner would have articulated that to me recently.
Deputy Noel Grealish, my apologies, Deputy Grealish.
The Concordia Taoiseach, over the past week I've been contacted by many parents of children with severe and profound disabilities regarding their children who are at home with no learning support. The ongoing struggles faced by these families have been well documented over the past week, including learning loss, significant behavioural issues and serious regression. Can you outline what steps have been taken by the government to address outstanding issues to ensure that these schools are opened? And also, Taoiseach, can the staff at these schools be vaccinated as a matter of urgency so that the children can return to school as soon as possible. Taoiseach, will you also ask the Minister of Education to do a Zoom meeting with parents' representatives from Rosedale School in Galway, Angelina Hines and Davy Walsh, to hear at first hand the difficulties they're experiencing as a result of the prolonged school closures?
First of all, I would appreciate the Deputy's concerns in relation to children with special needs and additional needs, and the Minister is engaging with all of the partners in respect of this issue with a view to facilitating a return in a safe manner, and those discussions and that engagement is ongoing. I do acknowledge the enormous challenges that it represents for the families involved and most importantly the children. I will ask the Minister if she's in a position to communicate with the school community of Rosedale, and I've read about some of the comments, and I believe I saw them on the
Thank you, Taoiseach.
News, if I'm not mistaken. I thought it was very interesting insights and presentation made by the principal in relation to her sense of her capacity and the capacity of the school to facilitate the return of the children. So the Minister is actively engaged on it, and I'll ask her to engage.
Thank you very much, Taoiseach. Deputy Matthew McGrath.
Taoiseach, I want to return to the issue of St. Bridget's Hospital in Carrick-on-Shore, which you unceremoniously just decided was closed, you and your Minister, Stephen Donnelly, and Minister Butler, and your point-blank refusal to meet with Councillor Cian Brook and the councils from Tipperary County Council, and the activists. And Catherine Foley was pushing a bed to Dublin today, but due to the 5 kilometre rule she had to desist. They want answers to know what is defective in the hospital. HIQA reports all the time had said it was fit for COVID step down in the first lockdown. Now are you going to use it for COVID? And will this hospital, can this hospital be re-examined to the repair works that needed, the structural defects repaired, or whatever you're saying is wrong with it? HIQA report wasn't quite clear, very little I could see wrong with it. A fabulous institution. And we've listened to testimonies from families all over Christmas, how their loved ones were cared for there and died there with dignity. And will you meet with, as I said, Councillor Burke and his colleagues, and meet with the activists in Carrick-on-Shore, and indeed the impeccable nursing and doctor staff that were there, medical staff?
Thank you, Deputy.
It's a shocking indictment on your government to close this, especially in a time of COVID.
Taoiseach.
Well, sorry, the government doesn't decide to close any institution in that manner. The Health Service Executive, yes, takes operational decisions. My understanding was that the HSE had a plan to invest significantly in St. Bridget's, with additional and different services being applied there. And that initially that met with some positive responses. But people have, no, but that's my understanding, and people have reflected on that, and people have different perspectives on it. I don't have any difficulty engaging with people in relation to it. But, when HIQA reports are, we can't ignore HIQA reports either in respect of particular institutions or facilities, and I will engage again with the HSE in relation to the matter.
Taoiseach, Deputy Thomas Pringle.
Thank you, Cancora. Taoiseach, yourself and your ministers today are rightly facing a wave of anger and upset from survivors and victims of mother and baby homes on the back of the publication of the Commission's report and your government's handling of it. We in the opposition warned you of this back in October as Minister O'Gorman rammed the Commission of Investigation records through the Dáil here in a single day. We now see that the subject access requests for personal data are still being refused by the Commission, contrary to your Attorney General's and that the GDPR be applied, a point which your government only recognised after legislation was passed. Taoiseach, will you commit to amending Section 6 of the Commission of Investigation Records Act 2020 to explicitly state that the preeminence of the GDPR and the enabling legislation over domestic legislation?
Again, I think the Minister, at the time when that legislation had to be introduced in order to protect and save and preserve the records. I mean, Minister's bona fides were absolutely correct on that occasion, and I think that should be acknowledged. And if you read the 6th interim report of the Commission, it makes it very, very clear that the legislation was both urgent and necessary. And I will ask the Minister to come back to you in relation to that specific point you raised in terms of the application of GDPR and access to information, which again, as I said earlier, we believe in people's right to access.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Thomas Gould.
Taoiseach,
Last night in my constituency, a community came under attack from youths causing fires and antisocial behaviour. The reason for this attack is vacant derelict council properties that are being allowed idle for years. Now, there are a number of problems with this. One, is you have thousands of families in Cork who are crying out to be housed, and then they're looking at houses lying idle. But the problem is, Taoiseach, they're a magnet for young people, for gangs, antisocial behaviour, criminality, and they're terrifying and terrorising communities. I've asked the Minister to give local authorities complete authority to do up these houses, not to leave them lie idle for years, and to stop all the red tape and bureaucracy in Dublin, and let Cork City Council work on this. Will you support my call and asking the Minister to allow this?
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
First of all, the Derelict Sites Act is there. I mean, the local authority should intervene now. And Deputy, you would have been a very active member of the local authority up to quite recently. You were successfully elected in the general election nearly a year ago now. And you well know that the local authority can and has the wherewithal to intervene, particularly in the context of derelict sites and vacant properties. But and I do accept your point that vacant properties are a magnet for antisocial activity and behaviour, and it's not acceptable. So I don't know whether you've been in touch with the local authority in respect of this, but it's something I'll make the Minister aware of the fact that you visited today.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Danny Healy-Rae.
As we all know, the coronavirus has wrecked our country. People have lost their lives. People have lost their jobs and their businesses. And the whole country is totally disrupted. This virus was reported and is reported to have originated in Wuhan in China. The WHO, our government, or the last government, gave $9.5 million to, sought to go into Wuhan before the end of last year, and they were refused, and they were told that they won't be left in till maybe the 31st of January, or not even then. Taoiseach, I'm asking you, what investigations or what have you asked the WHO as to what has happened? Have you spoken to the United Nations? I mean, we have a sovereign country that has been impacted by this virus in a dreadful way, more so than if we were bombed like they were bombed in Pearl Harbor. I'm asking you, Taoiseach, are you going to investigate what's happened?
All right,
they're already saying now that there's another virus originating there. Pneumonia. Are you going to let this go on and on without making any attempt to find out what has happened or what they did to the whole world?
Taoiseach.
I believe in the World Health Organization. I think it's an essential body that deserves the support of all the member states of the United Nations. And it is regrettable that they've been refused entry into Wuhan. A team of investigators were due in there to try and identify the source and so on of COVID-19. Not in a blame sort of scenario, but rather to try and understand fully how the virus originated and how it spread. And I believe that is necessary, and I hope that situation can be resolved. And I think the World Health Organization plays an extraordinarily effective role. It needs more support from member states of the United Nations, but it does play an extraordinary role in terms of the public health arena. And have been involved in so many outbreaks of various diseases across the globe, and have helped so many vulnerable countries and communities.
Thank you very much. The time is up. Deputy Imelda Munster, please.
Taoiseach, once again, and for the umpteenth time, I want to raise the issue of funding for the Port Access Northern Cross route in Drogheda. I understand that funding announcements for projects under LEHAV are imminent. Now, this is the third time that Louth County Council have made an application for funding, and for 15 long years, Taoiseach, we've waited for this funding. It is a vital piece of infrastructure to allow for the development of Drogheda and also to allow for the development of up to some 5,000 homes under the plan, something you spoke about earlier. Taoiseach, in February of 2019, your Minister Darragh O'Brien was in Drogheda canvassing for the local elections, and in that time he made a public call that the road should be built. Now that he is in charge, if that call was genuine, is he going to follow through and deliver the funding for the Port Access Northern Crossing?
Thank you, Deputy.
Taoiseach, I'm asking you to ensure that this time round, after 15 long years of waiting and the third application, will you ensure that we get the funding for the Port Access Northern Crossing in this round of funding?
Taoiseach.
Obviously, I can't preempt the allocation of this particular round of funding or the distribution of it, and that's a matter that's been considered by the Minister in consultation with other departments. Obviously, I think the case as well is obviously, as you have said, as has been articulated by others, is a significant issue that needs resolution. But I certainly raise your concerns with the Minister.
Deputy Michael Collins.
Thank you, Taoiseach. The Irish fishing industry was worth 1.2 billion prior to the Brexit trade deal. It also created 16,000 jobs scattered around coastal communities. The Irish fishing industry caught 60% of its mackerel in UK waters, but the new negotiated deal means we will be reduced to around 13%. This deal is completely negative for Ireland. For instance, Belgium and Spain will lose less than 1,000 tonnes per annum in the pelagic sector, while Ireland lose a staggering 23,496 tonnes. Surely, Taoiseach, this shows the Irish government were asleep at the wheel during recent negotiations. You yourself, Taoiseach, said the deal after it was signed would impact negatively on our fishing industry, while President Macron announced the deal done by Michel Barnier as a good deal for French fishermen. Taoiseach, what exactly is the deal done in relation to Irish fishing? And please, for the sake of Irish fishing industry and the thousands of rural coastal jobs, don't announce another Irish fisherman wants to fish the waters like they've always done.
One of the first meetings I had this year was with representative bodies of the fishing industry and the fishing co-ops, and we always knew that Brexit was going to have a very negative impact on our fishing industry, principally because of the high percentages of particularly the pelagic stock being fished in British waters. And in particular, mackerel and prawn stock we were particularly concerned about, and others. And we have mitigated what could have been a far worse impact. And because of our close proximity to the UK and that we fish so much in British waters, the impact has been more negative for us. And the challenge now is to see, can we ameliorate that, but also more importantly, can we do everything we possibly can to support the fishing industry and the fisher, those involved in the fishing sector, from primary right through the entire production sector, and also the communities that the fishing industry serves in terms of economic development.
Thank you very much. Time is up, Taoiseach. Thank you. Deputy Mark Ward.
Amounts of money have been seized by the criminal assets bureaus over the year. 150 million is the last figure I have since its inception in 1996. I come from an area in Dublin called Knockandalkin that has been disproportionately affected by drug use and drug dealing over the years. I've seen how families being wiped out. Some of these have been relatives of mine, neighbours and friends of mine over the years. The money that CAB sees originates from areas like my own in Knockandalkin. I'm asking the Taoiseach, will he make sure that the money that CAB seizes goes back in to providing services in the areas that are most affected by this scourge in society?
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
Thank the Deputy for his remarks, and I do accept the impact of the activities that CAB have struck on your community and by those who deal in illicit drugs and criminal activity, a scourge on our society and on communities up and down the country. In my own, I think we need to have a systemic approach to the allocation of funding to communities that suffer from such activities. By that I mean through the various government departments, we should be in a proactive and coordinated way targeting resources through the Exchequer, not necessarily coming from CAB. CAB will go back in But in terms of education, in terms of dealing with young people, early school leavers, in terms of psychological supports and the whole social supports, a bit like the rapid areas of yesteryear, that we should restore that type of collective coordinated approach on the ground, a bit like the initiative which has been very effective in the North Inner City. That has been very, very effective.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Time is up.
That's the approach we need, I think, more systematically across the country.
Deputy Michael Healy-Rae.
Ceann Comhairle, Taoiseach, a lot of students have been in contact with me ahead of the 2021 to 2022 academic year, which I know sounds like a lifetime away, but for those get here, SUSI grant, it will be based on the 2020 income, as you know. The COVID-19 payment, which a lot of students received and continue to receive, is going to play havoc with the grants next year. And now is the time to address this issue. The new SUSI scheme will issue from the department in February 2021, before SUSI opens for the new applications and renewals in April 2021. Clearly, it is my view that the COVID payment should not be assessed against these students, and there is many reforms required in SUSI, but regarding the PUP payments as a reckonable income, Taoiseach, it is only fair, and perhaps Minister Harris will also address this issue, that it should not be taken into account because of the pandemic, because of the crisis. I think it would all be right and fair to make sure that it wouldn't be taken into account. Thank you, Taoiseach.
Thank the Deputy for raising the issue. I will discuss this further with Minister Harris, and the government will give broader consideration to it, but I'm conscious that the SUSI scheme is founded and grounded in legislation, and has parameters that it has to operate within. So I'll revert back.
Pádraig McLaughlin.
Gordon Moggins, Ceann Comhairle. Taoiseach, you'll recall in 2019 the Sea Fisheries Amendments Bill came through the Houses, and at that time the government stated that was to reinstate the principle of voisinage, to allow Irish fishers, no matter where they're resident on the island of Ireland, to fish and sell their produce on this island. This is now the 13th of January. For 13 days, Irish fishermen with a licence in the north of Ireland are being prevented from landing their fish in harbours and piers across the state, with the exception of Killybegs and Castletownbere. Now, in counties like Donegal, this means that the SFPA are literally at harbours preventing Irish fishermen landing into their harbour, but worse than that, they're going to co-ops and producers and getting rid of their lobsters and crabs. It's an appalling situation. And Taoiseach, you have it in your power by this Friday to designate more piers and harbours across the state and to reinstate their fishing rights and their right to supply to this island.
Taoiseach, to conclude on this matter.
The Deputy raises a very serious and important issue. Because from the 1st of January, as you know, the United Kingdom has become a third country and therefore subject to illegal, unregulated and unreported legislation and North East Atlantic Fisheries Commission requirements. Castletownbere and Killybegs are the current Irish ports designated for third country landings of fish for both of those purposes, and that includes Northern Ireland UK vessels. As we know, as you said, UK fishing vessels, including Northern Ireland vessels, have had a pattern of landings into many Irish ports prior to the UK leaving the European Union. The Minister for Agriculture, Food and the Marine has requested the Sea Fisheries Protection Authority to review the issue in terms of additional resourcing and costs that would be required in the event of further designations, and is working on the issue. And so I think what's in, there are practical issues involved here in terms of the designation of further ports, but I do take the point overall that you've made.
Thank you very much, Taoiseach. That concludes today's questions and promise legislation. 5 deputies were not reached. Deputies Connolly, O'Donnell, O'Cahasick, McAuliffe and Quinlivan, and they will be given priority tomorrow.